$500,000 for what? That was the thought running through my head as I held the letter from my homeowners association. The HOA, the people who were supposed to keep our neighborhood organized, had just slapped me with a fine for $500,000. Yes, you heard that right. Not $500. Not even $50,000. A full-on, life-destroying $500,000. At first, I laughed because I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe they added a few too many zeros. But nope, when I read further, I realized they were dead serious. The HOA claimed I had broken so many rules over the years that they were stacking fines and penalties on me. And to top it off, they gave me an ultimatum: pay up or face foreclosure. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't about to hand over my hard-earned money. Instead, I was about to turn the tables on them in the most unbelievable way. I bought my house in what I thought was a peaceful, well-kept neighborhood. The houses were beautiful, each with manicured lawns that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Trees lined the streets, kids rode bikes without a care, and everything seemed perfect. The kind of place where you'd expect friendly neighbors waving hello and barbecues on the weekends. On the surface, it was a dream come true. But behind the neat hedges and smiling faces, there was an invisible force controlling everything. The Homeowners Association, or HOA. If you've ever lived under an HOA, you know the truth. Those rules can be brutal. At first, I thought the HOA existed just to keep the community nice and safe. But the deeper I got into it, the more I realized it was less about protecting property values and more about micromanaging every part of people's lives. They had rules for everything. Rules that didn't just keep the neighborhood looking good, but rules that felt designed to make you feel small. Your grass couldn't be more than 2 inches tall. Yes, 2 inches. Not a blade higher. Your trash cans had to be hidden at exactly the right angle behind your fence, like some weird game of hide and seek. Even the color of your front door had to be pre-approved, or else you'd get a warning letter. It wasn't just neighborhood standards. It was control. At first, I played along. I kept the lawn trimmed, measured twice to make sure. I hid my trash cans. I even submitted my paint samples, like a good little homeowner. But then came the nitpicking. The kind of pettiness you'd think was a joke if it weren't happening to you. One day, they fined me $50 because my garbage can was visible for 3 minutes too long. 3 minutes. I remember thinking, who even watches this stuff? Another time, they slapped me with a $100 fine because my holiday lights stayed up past the deadline. It was January 3rd. I hadn't even had time to take them down after New Year's. Then came the one that really set me off. A $200 fine because the paint on my mailbox was fading. It wasn't peeling. It wasn't graffiti covered. It had a small scuff. But apparently, that was enough to violate their aesthetic guidelines. I started to feel like I was living in a prison with a bunch of power-hungry guards. Every day I'd come home wondering what new violation they'd find. It didn't matter how much I complied. Every time I pushed back, they added more fines. It felt personal, like they had a target on my back. But nothing, compared to the day I got that letter. A $500,000 fine. $500,000 for accumulated violations that they said had been ongoing for years. I remember my hands shaking as I read it. That's when it hit me. They weren't just trying to control me anymore. They were trying to crush me. Here's the thing the HOA didn't know. I wasn't just some average homeowner they could push around. By profession, I'm a lawyer. And not just any lawyer. I specialize in property law. This is literally the field I know best. The game I've spent years studying and practicing. The very rule book they were trying to use against me. I knew it inside and out. Probably better than they did. So when I got that $500,000 letter, I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I didn't even lose sleep. Instead, I rolled up my sleeves, pulled out every single file, every bylaw, every meeting notice, and every rule book they had ever sent me since the day I moved into that house. I built a mountain of paperwork on my dining room table and spent weeks digging through it all. It was like preparing for the most important trial of my life. And guess what I discovered? The HOA had been breaking their own rules for years. See, HOAs are supposed to follow very strict procedures. They have to hold regular meetings, keep accurate financial records, and follow state laws about how fines are issued. But when I compared what they were supposed to be doing with what they were actually doing, it was a complete disaster. For starters, they had been mismanaging funds. Homeowners pay monthly dues, right? That money is supposed to go toward community improvements, fixing the pool, landscaping, repairing sidewalks. But according to their own records, tens of thousands of dollars had simply disappeared. No receipts, no explanations, just blank entries and vague notes. Then there were the meetings, or rather, the lack of them. By law, they were supposed to hold open meetings so residents could attend and vote on issues. Instead, the board had been making decisions behind closed doors, without ever telling anyone. That alone was enough to get them into serious legal trouble. And those so-called fines they slapped on me? Completely unenforceable under state law. The rules said they had to give written warnings, allow appeals, and hold hearings before issuing fines. They had skipped every single step. In fact, when I ran the numbers and compared their books, I realized something shocking. The HOA didn't just have no right to fine me. They actually owed us homeowners money because of their shady bookkeeping and illegal fee collections. But then, buried deep in the documents, I found what I like to call the golden ticket, their office building. Technically, that office wasn't really theirs to begin with. It was classified as common property, meaning it was owned collectively by all of us homeowners, not just the board members. And because of their financial mismanagement, I discovered a legal pathway to file a lawsuit and place a lien directly on that property. Think about the irony. They were trying to take my home away from me, but the law gave me a way to take their office away from them. It was poetic justice. So I filed a lawsuit. I drafted every motion carefully, step by step, citing their violations, the missing funds, the illegal fines, and the mishandling of community assets. When the paperwork was complete, I marched down to the courthouse, submitted the case, and started the clock ticking on the HOA's worst nightmare. I wasn't just fighting back anymore. I was going on the attack. When the HOA got my legal notice, they were furious. I could almost hear the panic through their angry phone calls. First, they tried to brush it off with arrogance. You don't know what you're doing. We'll crush you in court. Then came the threats. They called me at all hours, left voicemails filled with intimidation, and even had board members show up at my house, pounding on my door, demanding I drop the case. But here's the thing. They weren't dealing with a scared homeowner anymore. They were dealing with a lawyer who knew every inch of property law like the back of his hand. And no amount of threats or intimidation was going to make me back down. I kept calm, kept quiet, and prepared. Finally, the day of the court hearing arrived. I'll never forget the sight of the HOA board walking into that courtroom. They strutted in like they were kings and queens, confident, smug, and untouchable. You could almost see them smirking, as if this was just a formality before they steamrolled me into the ground. But then it was my turn. When I stood up and started presenting the evidence, the energy in the room shifted. I laid out everything. The missing funds, the illegally issued fines, the secret meetings, the violations of state law. I stacked document after document in front of the judge, each one more damning than the last. And I'll never forget the judge's expression. At first, neutral and professional. Then, as the evidence piled higher and higher, the eyebrows raised. The lips tightened. The silence grew heavier. It was clear the HOA had no leg to stand on. When it came time for the ruling, the courtroom was dead silent. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. The judge leaned forward, shuffled the papers, and delivered the decision. First, all the fines against me, every single one, were thrown out completely. The $500,000 nightmare? Gone in an instant. Then came the hammer. The HOA was found guilty of violating state property laws and ordered to pay damages. The same people who had spent years bleeding homeowners dry were now on the hook themselves. But here's where it gets really good. The judge gave them a deadline to pay up. And when they couldn't come up with the money, guess what property went up for grabs? Their office. That's right. The same office where they held their secret meetings. The same office where they drafted their ridiculous fines and power-hungry letters. The same office they used to control and intimidate the neighborhood. It was suddenly mine for the taking. And when the dust settled, that's exactly what happened. I became the legal owner of the HOA's office building. The tables had turned completely. They tried to bankrupt me, but in the end, they lost the very headquarters they used to abuse their power. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the neighborhood. The once untouchable HOA had been stripped of their throne, and I was the one holding the keys. Owning the HOA office wasn't just about getting revenge. It was about sending a message. This wasn't just some building filled with desks and filing cabinets. This was the heart of their operation, the place where they held their secret meetings, plotted new rules, and mailed out fines like they were confetti. And now, it had my name on the deed. The very first thing I did was move my own small business into that building. I put up a clean new sign with my company's name right above the front door. I can't describe the satisfaction I felt the first time I pulled into the parking lot, unlocked the door with my own key, and sat down at a desk that used to belong to the very people who tried to crush me. It wasn't just poetic justice. It was living proof that the tables had turned completely. And let me tell you, the look on the HOA board members' faces when they walked by was priceless. They were forced to pass by the office every time they came into the neighborhood, and there was no avoiding it. Every time their eyes landed on that sign, it reminded them of their failure, their corruption, and their arrogance. They had tried to take away my home, and instead, I had taken away theirs. But the victory wasn't just mine. It belonged to the whole community. Once the truth about the shady bookkeeping and illegal fines came out in court, the homeowners finally had the proof they needed to take action. People who had once been too scared to speak up against the HOA suddenly had courage. We held a special election, and for the first time in years, the homeowners had a real say in how the neighborhood was run. The old leadership, the power-hungry bullies who had turned our community into a prison, were voted out. In their place, we chose new board members, neighbors who actually cared about keeping the neighborhood safe, clean, and fair. The difference was night and day. Almost overnight, the ridiculous fines stopped. No more $50 charges for trash cans being visible for a few minutes. No more $200 penalties for slightly faded paint. No more micromanaging every detail of people's lives. Instead, the rules became reasonable, focused on real issues like safety and maintenance, not petty control. And you could feel the change. People started smiling again. Families decorated their homes without fear of punishment. Neighbors began hosting block parties, cookouts, and holiday events, things that had all but disappeared under the old HOA. The neighborhood finally felt like home again. Not just a place we lived, but a community we were proud to be part of. So in the end, the HOA's attempt to squeeze me for $500,000 completely backfired. Instead of losing my house, I gained their office. Instead of being crushed by their power, I exposed their corruption and helped set my neighborhood free. Now, whenever someone tells me about their nightmare HOA stories, I just smile, lean in, and say, "Don't worry. Sometimes the little guy wins. And sometimes, just sometimes, the little guy takes the whole office."